All right, this is very simple. All right, all I want you to do is make a decision. Pick a colour and then apply to it. Don't tell anyone what it is. Pick a colour and we'll see it. So we start, everyone stands up. Oh my God, excellent. So if you get the colour correct, you remain standing. If you get the colour incorrect, you're out of the game. All right, ready? So make a decision. Made it? Good. The answer is red. Good. Not many people chose black. All right, make a decision. Make a decision. Sometimes things surprise us. We expect to have to make a decision about two things, and then we get something skewed or unexpected in there. Decision made. Is that it? We got everyone. Okay. And that's only decision 4. Oh no, there's one at the back. Still standing. Last decision. There we go. Okay. Give us survivor. All right, what's the point in that? I can't remember what the point in that is. Every time we go skydiving, we make a series of simple decisions. What we made there was 6 simple 50-50 decisions. It's not one decision that keeps us safe. It's a chain of decisions that we make. So if we make a series of bad decisions, we can get hurt or worse, killed. Risk assessment shows that incidents occur. It's typically a result of 5 or 6 or potentially more bad decisions or mistakes that create the problems. We start and we end up with this chain of events causing us to have problems. Remember the quote we had this morning from Bill Booth? So many fatalities occur because of decisions jumpers make before even getting in the aeroplane. Do not join that group. Be smarter than that. And we're making lots of decisions. If we look at these, many of the decisions that we make are actually not particularly related to the bit when we fell through the sky for 50 seconds or the deployment of the parachute. All of these things, the equipment that I choose to use, we've already seen this morning that can affect our malfunction rate, it can affect the way we move across the sky, it can affect how and when we're landing relative to other people. And this was a decision that you made months before even your kit arrived or was manufactured or ordered. It can be influenced by what you'd like in your dreams to be jumping compared to in reality what you should be jumping. We've got guidance, we've got rules about what size parachutes now with the introduction of the rules last year, which actually fundamentally has changed very little in terms of what people were currently jumping. It may slow some of the people that wanted to rapidly downsize. Which drop zone? Sometimes that's not even a fundamental decision, it's just a convenience thing. I'm going to go to the drop zone that's nearest to me, it makes it easier. But you have to sometimes think about the facilities, the parachute landing area. Perhaps we have the wrong process for a certain part of our jump operation. Perhaps these things can influence or lead to more complex or difficult skydives for you, to add more risk. The people that you choose to jump with, the type of weather that you choose to jump in, and we spoke a little bit about that this morning. There's definitely, and part of the A license brief is the fact that there are 2 sets of sort of guidance from British Skydiving. One is the rules in which students can jump in, so that is the sort of 15 knot, 80 mile an hour winds, cloud and so on, and then we get to qualified jumpers. Instantly over one jump you can suddenly jump in 20 knot winds, but do you want to? Is it wise to do so? The weather decision is very, very different for everybody individually. We see teams four-way, and when we've done the UK Skydiving League, the UKSL, we've seen teams here where 3 people are like, yeah, let's go, let's get round 4 done, and at the same time you see an individual within that team often going, I don't know whether I'm comfortable in these gusty conditions or these situations. I'm jumping at a new DZ and I'm on the hired equipment from here. Actually, I'm used to a pack and now I'm jumping out of a caravan. Well, I've just gone through 4 decisions there. So all of these little bits can add up to an instant, and then they have perhaps the wisdom to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable here, I'm going to trust my instincts. And the right thing I hope from the rest of the team is go, okay, it's a team. You choose not to, we are not going to. All right. Even subtle things like the aircraft and pilot make a difference. You know, we had a Skyvan here. The door slipped from its catches, just dropped down a little bit on exit, and there was just chaos in the Skylab because that door moved on exit. Just the subtle changes of the aircraft can sometimes catch you out. So there's a lot of decisions that we're making when we jump out of an aeroplane that are occurring well before we even get into the aeroplane. Some of these decisions are relatively fixed. You know, we've made them quite some time ago. We don't really, once we've bought that parachute, we're pretty much in a position here where I'm either going to jump it or I'm not going to jump. We don't want to be swapping and changing gear. But there's a whole raft of decisions that we make, and they all contribute to our safety, or equally, they could be that little event that causes us problems. Bob goes skydiving. Bob has joined the local university skydiving club. It's great, well run, and they've got their own gear. Saved myself some money. Bob decides to do a two-way FS jump with another club member. No problems so far. They decide to break off at 5,000 feet. Bob initiates the deployment of his main above 3.5. Everything legit. No problem at all so far. All looks like just a normal everyday jump. On deployment, the main parachute either suffers a brake fire or the brake wasn't even set in the first place. So the canopy is now opening with twists and it is rotating. Bob decides to kick. It was a 210, pilot 210. So actually that's probably not a poor decision. But then we talked about a little bit about hard decks or heights that we'd like to stop and think about whether I'm winning or not. What height should we really have considered to come to an end with the kicking bit?
Okay.
As high as possible, yes. Always a good caveat, get out of that one. Don't go below 2,000 feet. Yeah? Alright, so this guy is merrily kicking away. I'm on the ground watching through the telemeters. He paused actually. You'll notice the name has been changed for the protection of the genuine people involved. They did pause for a bit, about 2, 3, and then unfortunately they went back to kicking, and they kept kicking. They eventually decided to cut away at about 1,500 feet. So that's the point when they realised that they were absolutely losing this game. So we've already, maybe not consciously, but we've already made several decisions about the parachute system that we're choosing to use. It's not their own, it's borrowed, hired. How they're going to respond to a particular incident, and then maybe on a subconscious level or not a conscious decision, but it is a decision in some way, they've decided to breach the advice about the hard deck and go beyond that. Perhaps you can't say they chose not to be altitude aware, but for some reason they've got down there. Alright, much to Bob's surprise, he's now in free fall. He's removed the cutaway pad, he's released himself from his main parachute on an equipment that is fitted with an RSL, but he is in free fall. So his drills were cut away, at which point he's in free fall. That is very odd for someone at 1,400 feet. Decisions made under pressure aren't always logical or reliable. So at this stage, as things are not going as expected, Bob basically decides, again, whether that's subconscious or conscious, to analyse what is happening. So it's worth noting at this point that Bob is in free fall, holding his reserve handle, and then wondering why his RSL hasn't caused reserve deployment. He's about 1,000 feet at this point, accelerating, but because he cut away relatively low, he's not at an AAD firing speed yet. He's still got quite a long way to go before that. In fact, it's debatable whether he would reach an AAD firing speed in enough time for the AAD to open the reserve. So the decisions that are going on here now aren't necessarily helping him. That was my opinion from the ground, and fortunately he did. He pulled the reserve handle. We had the double stack of porter cabins around the back. From DZ control, he went behind the porter cabin at line stretch with the free brake still attached to his reserve. So you can imagine how relatively low he was at that stage. His reserve opened. I ran that way. and I could see him just meet the ground. He had a 2 to 3 second reserve ride into wind. Landed on his feet. He was fine, yeah. But we've got to be careful about making assumptions. I'm going to need to go over here and see what. All right, yep. So, what goes on here? Decisions he made. Well, firstly, he decided to use the borrowed equipment, the university equipment. No big deal. The decisions within the university about how they administered packing were part of his decision, or became inherited by him, the decisions that other people had made, by choosing to use the equipment. As it turned out, the supervision of the packing, the recording of who was packing, which should be absolute. Every parachute that's not owned by you individually should have a log and a record as to who packed it. We can see who's packed each of the centre kit. That wasn't as good as it was. It turned out that the guy who actually set the brakes, if he set the brakes, was not qualified to pack. It had then been packed by, hard to tell whether it was a committee of people, but it got packed. Many of the people who had hands on the kit did not have packing certificates. And then the other club, they were all in the same university club, they then decided to do that. When the parachute was put on, the tag that attaches the RSL had folded underneath. That's not uncommon to see on the flight line. It had not been noticed. As the main risers pulls tight, it just snags the release tag and undoes the RSL. That's probably how we expect the RSL came undone. You'll notice the static line equipment has solid links because we don't want them in a situation. He then expects this equipment to do what he had expected it to do. This should be sufficient. He was holding on to his reserve fund, and then he does choose to analyse what's going on, and he can't really explain that afterwards. He said, yeah, I was in free fall, holding on to my reserve handle for 2 or 3 seconds, thinking, it was, oh yeah, and he said, as soon as I pulled the reserve handle, the reserve opened. I don't know when this probably, it's only about 2 years ago, 3 years ago when this happened. This is the closest in my 12 years as a CI to having to watching a fatality. This guy was incredibly low to the ground. His reserve got him away with it. All right, so don't make assumptions about the kit. Make sensible decisions as to what you're doing. Some of the decisions that even you might not consider as decisions are decisions. Analysis of what's going on at an inappropriate moment, choice of the equipment and how that was packed, who can pack it, how the documentation keeps it safe. This is another story from here, genuinely true. So today, Bob is doing a 10-way FS jump. It's a busy day during the boogie. The group are a little bit late to get ready to the dirt dive and have their kit on out here. There are tannoy calls saying, come on, get your gear straight on, let's get the dirt dive process done. One member of the group is late. This means they're late through the flight land check process, and therefore they are late to the aeroplane. So now we can already see this snowball chain of events happening. All that guy had to do was be a little less cool and turn up on time. But nope, he was a few minutes late, and then the whole thing starts to cascade. So they climb on board in the wrong order. They've not actually had sufficient rehearsal time, or it's not clear in everyone's mind because everything's just a little bit flustered. In they get. During the run-in, they're trying to rearrange yourself. So this is the boogie, the spot, we were running in that way. The spots consistently for the other 40, 50 lifts that day were in exactly the same place. Everyone was opening in the right place and landing very comfortably back on. During this one, they're just basically having to shuffle themselves round. So we've already got a chain of events that have occurred. All right, and we've got this snowballing effect about the decision. They get out pretty deep. They're a good mile to a mile and a half further up in that direction. All right, it's one of those real anomalies. You see people opening, next lift opens, next lift opens, next lift doesn't arrive. Oh, why are they all the way over there? Not an answer I had at the time. Under canopy, Bob realises that they are deep and therefore could have okay, this is a little bit old. Applied CH1. You know, extend the range of your canopy is a fundamental part of what we teach students in what is now student CT, and then CT1 it's practiced again, and likewise in CT2. The ability to analyse how far you're going to take yourself through the accuracy check, and then how to change that glide angle of the parachute using the toggles to get the maximum amount of your parachute and decide whether you're going to get back. All right. They did not really do that until quite late on in their flight. Prior to that, they'd been flying. It was a Spectre 170, so and they were relatively light, but they just basically flew back on full drive initially. Everyone goes back to the PLA, but not in the prime cutgrass area. A lot of them were landing just the other side of the hangar in that area there. They could manage to sort of get into the airfield nicely into wind and then land at that point. And then in this individual's case, in Bob's case, they just got blinkered into this, I've got to get back, instead of deciding how far they can get back, deciding on what the best way to apply input to get their parachute back to the airfield. And then a late decision to face into wind was their final sort of flawed decision, if you like. Now, fortunately, I suppose the irony is this person made the decision so desperately late that when they wanted to face into wind and pulled the toggle fully down at full drive, the parachute only got about 45 degrees until the impact point. So they didn't actually manage. If they decided to turn around into wind a couple of seconds earlier, I think they'd have got around with quite a lot more dramatic speed. They were rewarded with a free helicopter ride, a nice yellow colour, and they went that way to the hospital. They were back later on that day with just soft tissue bruising, but they got away with that quite remarkably. All the decisions there. Okay, if we go right back to the fundamentals, actually, some of the decisions that you make may not cost you. They might cost someone else. The person who was late to the dirt dive, the person that started this chain of events, was completely fine. They weren't the person who had this problem, but they influenced other people through their decisions. So particularly if you're that cool person that's always 5 minutes late, and I'm guilty of being late to the flight line sometimes because I end up answering 6 questions, signing 4 documents and forgetting that I'm now on an 8-minute call. But if we're a repeat offender, then we're potentially actually affecting other people at that stage. So let's get ready nice and early. And then that snowballs into this effect. You know, they were late to the aeroplane, they got jumbled up inside the aeroplane. At no point was there sort of a stop button there. Right, hold on, we are not ready, or we're not, whoa, we're getting in the aeroplane in the wrong order. Swap round, now let's climb in. And suddenly you've broken that chain, and then the event no longer happens because they were in the right process. So we can see how, hopefully we can see from this, how our decisions that we make can influence our safety, or indeed can influence others. We can also see that by just making one good decision, it can sometimes literally collapse the previous 4 bad decisions that we made. And the final point I'd make is that many of the decisions are made well before we put our gear on and go to the airplane. The parachute we use, the event that we're taking part in, the timing, all of the other processes that are here to keep you safe. Omit one of those and sometimes it can snowball away from you. The same ram air parachute technology that has led to soft openings and landings, flat glides and small pack volumes has opened the door for higher performance with increased wing loadings. Skilled and practiced jumpers who choose to fly this equipment may achieve desirable results given the right training and the use of good judgment. That comes from the USPA. I do like my quotes. In the hands of untrained, uncurrent, unskilled and unpracticed pilots, this equipment poses a potential threat to the pilots and others sharing the airspace. Okay, so this is their safety information manual quite a while ago from the USPA. In the end, this jumper's choice of equipment proved to be a fatal one. That was a quote from a USPA fatality report of a UK skydiver a number of years ago now. We're probably talking about 15 years ago. That was the last line in his fatality report. Right? The choice, just one choice that he made, along with the type of dive. They ended up low, they ended up in a difficult landing space. All of these things snowballed out of control. Ultimately, a decision he'd made previously about the parachute could have just influenced the entire thing and removed all the problems. All of these decisions are important, and in fact, in reality, we make huge amounts of decisions. It's not 6 boxes on a piece of paper. You can only make the right decisions with good training and a lot of practice. Be aware that when you're less current, you make poor or weaker decisions, perhaps about the landings or other things. Your decisions affect everyone around you, even if that's just a CI having to watch you and whistle past the buildings at line stretch. Oh, okay, yeah. Put your decisions into practice, all right? So don't find yourself in free fall holding a reserve handle, contemplating life, the universe, and why your RSL is not doing what you expect it to do. You know, the training says pull the reserve handle after you've cut away. Don't then interrupt that process. Any questions? Good. I think I've got 3 quotes to finish. Don't be drawn into the mispreconception, if that's a real word, that this is really safe and easy. Don't be complacent. Even though the equipment training may be much better and improved from what it used to be, you're still jumping from an aeroplane. Multiple world champion Dan BC runs a lot of the stuff out of Paris. I spoke at the AGM this year, and that's quite an old quote from him, but he does come up with a lot of wise thoughts about the experiences that he's seen over many years and many jumps, and that's kept him safe. Talking of many years and many jumps, always choose a canopy that you will grow out of, not one that you plan to grow into. So the latest changes with the guidance and the regulation has hopefully helped that a little bit. It is better to make a reputation as a skydiver over many years and many jumps, and not by placing your face and femurs in the dirt. Planting your face and femurs in the dirt. So that was written by a guy called Scott Miller, who was a PD test pilot for many years. Used to do seminars at DeLand mainly. But basically, we still see it. You know, people want to buy a canopy because that's where I want to be in a couple of hundred jumps, and they're always sort of, that canopy's just ahead of them, ahead of their thought process, ahead of their capacity to process what's going on, and that's where the rapid downsizing problem came in. Hopefully, and we had no low turns last year, but it's just so volatile that statistics and what happens aren't what I'd say is viable, but hopefully the Form 330 and the guidelines and the rules as to what you can downsize to at what jumps should help us rectify the problem of people downsizing too early. Did some of the basic facts, I don't know whether some of the basic facts that the working group came to were really explained. There was some really interesting stuff from the working group before they came up with these charts and tables. In the 90s, it was taking something like 1,600 jumps before people got to a wing loading of 1.5. Yeah. In the 2000s, that was down to about 1,200 jumps, and in the 2010-2020, it was about 800. I think it may be slightly less. So people were downsizing twice as quickly as they ever used to, and it had just happened without really it being noticed. And suddenly it was normal to be downsizing every time you change canopy, or every period of time. The average back at the 1,600 jump in the 90s was about 4 canopies were used during that time period once they were off student status. So there were typically people doing 400 jumps. Oh, I'm going to change canopy and downsize. 400 jumps, change canopy. By the time they got to the 2000s, in their 800 jumps, I think the average was something like 7.8 canopies. So essentially, people were doing 90 jumps, change a canopy. 90 jumps, change a canopy. The rapid downsizing had just become a problem and not really noticed. I think some of the people in the sport sort of people just downsize much more rapidly these days, but they hadn't really thought about the consequences. That this means that people never get to a stage where they're jumping canopies they're familiar with. they only ever jumped them in the right conditions. They never really had that anomaly or that weird one that got chucked up. And then suddenly they're on a 120 and that weird one occurs, and they just didn't have any tools available to them or any skills or any experience to deal with it. And that was thought, Mark Bayardo, when he started the working group, was very much expecting to see that the problems are going to be these people jumping velocities and cross braces and 100 square foot canopy. And he very quickly realised that broadly it was across the entire range that we were seeing problems. The guy that downsized to the 190 too early, downsized to the 170 too early, and to the 150 too early, to the 135 too early, to the 120, and then he discovered on the 107 that he hadn't got the skills to deal with it when it did just pick up an anomaly. Everything was going too quick. So that's why the charts go across the sort of the range, if you like, and aren't even specific to whether you're jumping a sabre or a velocity or anything else. It was some interesting facts really did come out of that, and it did show that generally it was across the board. They found that the most malfunctions occur on Sabre 2, but most jumps are made on a Sabre 2, and actually then when they looked at the proportion, it was pretty much universally the same. It wasn't the velocities that were always being cut away. Everyone was cutting away the canopy they were jumping at a relatively even amount. Stuart Meacock sort of looked at all those sort of figures. They then looked at the most popular canopy and the incidents and injuries and that. I can't remember the exact stats, so don't fully quote me on this, but it was something like 134 injuries over the previous 10 years on this type of canopy, and 132 of them, they were being jumped at a wing loading or a recommendation that was outside of, in that case, Performance Design's recommendation. So that was another indicator that actually there's advice out there, it's from the manufacturer, it's decades old, it's up to date though, and actually what's really happening is everyone's just ignoring it and just have a slightly smaller version. John, you might remember, that's about right, isn't it? Yeah. So they came up with some interesting, and it was quite a start for everybody, involved in that, and I was not involved in the working group, so actually see that and sort of go, yeah, this is black and white, there is a problem, and we've just let it happen for 20 years. Even though skydiving equipment has made huge leaps forwards in terms of reliability in the past 2 decades, and skydiving safety devices such as AADs have been introduced, the fatality rate has stayed roughly constant since the early 80s. So that's called Bill Booth's rule. So actually that is not so true anymore. What I'm really pleased to say is this is an old quote, and it was true through the 80s, through the 90s. AADs started firing, and then we had 0P canopies almost at exactly the same time, so we could just hook it into the ground instead. Landing injuries weren't massive issues prior to that. They started to come up just at the same time as AADs removed the total low pull, no pull category. In modern terms, I think we have improved across the board with our training, safety days, the information that you have and have available to you, and the fatality rate comes down, but it's still stubbornly there, and in certain areas it just isn't required. That's it. Job done for that point. Any questions? So that's really just a general food for thought concept, what decisions do I make when I walk out there? Every jump that I do, the way I store my kit, where did I put my parachute, how did I use it, how do I use my equipment, what decisions am I thinking about making that will influence me next year and the other people about that new parachute, about that new container. Just these little things actually can have a real big ballooning effect on what happens to me in the future, or indeed the people perhaps that I potentially jump with. So what I'd say to you guys following that, at some stage, as a thought exercise, is just think about all the processes that you make and ask yourself, am I making the right decision? Could I make a slightly safer decision? There's some stuff from Dan BC, I think it's a year ago or so, he did a safety day talk which is available on YouTube and such like. We're out there, Emily. I'm just wrapping up. And he says safety is the responsibility of every individual. We cannot make skydiving safe. It is not safe. There are things that we do fundamentally, like throw ourselves out of an aeroplane, that inherently has its weaknesses from a safety point of view. But if we all individually look at the way we do things, then that contributes to the safety of everything that we do.